Welcome back to Spirit Sherpa. I'm your host, Kelle Sparta. And today we are going to talk about the importance of aligning your mindset and your values and addressing your limiting beliefs, even when you are at higher levels of income. I'm going to get to our guest in just a second, but I want to do a little housekeeping first. Just a reminder, Josh is still on walkabout. And so that is why you are just seeing me here with our guest. And so he will be back sometime soon. Who knows? It's walkabout, right? And so we're going to just hang in and keep going without him until that happens. And so just a reminder, please subscribe and share. This is how we grow our podcast, and this is how we get the message out to more people. It is so important right now to be hitting more people who are on their spiritual path, having spiritual awakenings, and giving them the resources they need in order to make that spiritual awakening transition graceful instead of painful. I've been doing, we're at probably, I think, 400 episodes now, right? So it's an insane amount of episodes. And we are basically the guide to getting yourself started. And please share this with your friends. Please share it and subscribe so that we get more ratings in Apple Podcasts. And please review, because when you review, more people see the show. By the way, guys, woohoo, we got named as the number 3 podcast in both the metaphysical and the shamanic podcast categories by FeedSpot for 2025. So thank you for making that happen for us. We are super excited and we love you for that. You guys just rock. So with that, I want to also remind you that the Discord server is there if you are one of the 100,000 people who are here on the planet. In order to up-level it, I am doing free trainings a couple times a month at different times of day so that everybody can make it, where I'm teaching you how to expand your energy, how to connect your energy to others, and how to run more energy in general. That's going to be super important for us creating that grid to up-level the planet. And so you'll know if you're one of those people, if when you had your spiritual awakening, you woke up and you went, oh my God, I've got such a huge mission and I don't know what it is. I don't know how to do it. And I don't even know how to get started. And I'm late. If you had that experience waking up, you're one of the 100,000. And so come join the Discord server. The link is on the homepage of the website right underneath the section where I talk about the 100,000. So please join and you'll find all of the events listed there. It is free to join. There is no cost. This is my public service for the work that we're doing in the world. So with that said, it's time to welcome Dr. Alan Lomax. He was kind enough to have me on his podcast it's been a while now. I think it's been like a month and a half, but we had such a good time. I was like, hey, come be on the podcast here and let's chat. He is doing some very interesting things in the world and from a very different place than what you hear about from other people. And he is a financial wealth manager. Is that right? Did I say that right?
I guess that'll do, yes.
Okay. All right. But he's working from a place of purpose. And that's a very different place than a lot of people that you would talk to in that industry. And I've asked him to come in today because he has a unique perspective on working through your stuff when you have more money. Because here's the thing, we only hear about money issues when we're talking about people who are broke. But people who have higher levels of money also have money issues. And they're different, but they do exist. And he's going to come in and talk about that and about aligning your wealth and your purpose and things like that. Alan, why don't you give us a little bit about your background? And because you've also got this amazing background in psycho processes and things like that. So why don't you introduce yourself and then we'll talk a little bit more.
I have a PhD in organizational systems psychology, and I have been in academia for over 40 years. And I have been in the investing realm for about 30 of those years. And I've seen ups and I've seen downs. And so here I am today. And I'm so happy to be with you, Kelle, because we did have such a wonderful time with you and talking about spiritual awakenings, and I was fascinated by the fact that you found your spiritual awakening as an infant. And unlike you, I was 38 years old before I found mine.
And you actually have an interesting and varied background financially as well. And so that's gone into, why don't you talk about how that went into how you ended up? Because you've got this PhD in what you would seem to be an unrelated field from the financial work that you're doing. How did that play into getting you to where you are now? How did you end up here?
I found my footing at 38 years old, and at that time, it was a rock bottom moment. I, for the first time in my life, went into psychotherapy. I discovered that the things that I had shunned about myself were my greatest strengths. And through that, I found a passion. And so I went back to university, got my counseling degree, my master's degree in counseling. Then I went on to get my PhD in organizational systems psychology. And during that time, I landed a job as a university professor and been doing that ever since. I spent those first 30 years of my life just in a near do well situation in complete poverty. So finding a university position was the first time I had a real genuine income. And that was great and wonderful. But I realized that there were many limitations to that. It just was never going to be a wealth developer. And so I just stumbled into real estate investing, and so many people, they make it so glamorous to invest in single family homes. And so that was essentially what I was doing, and doing some rehabs and holding and renting. And I developed my wealth beyond what I ever conceived that I could, and was doing quite well, I thought, until 2008, and that crash hit, and I was essentially wiped out. And at the same time, I lost the job that was bringing me so much meaning and purpose. So it was a dark time in my life. And during that time, I had wanted to be with horses all my life. And so after I had my university position, I did get into the horse world and loved it, and was into what was referred to as natural horsemanship and is referred to as natural horsemanship. Went to clinics and loved it and loved riding. And I came to a point in time where I realized that I was enjoying this immensely, but the horses were not getting the same thing out of this that I was. And it changed my thinking entirely. And this was going on during these very dark periods. And I came across a documentary. It was The Path of the Horse by Stormy May. It's free. You can get it on YouTube. It's a beautiful documentary. She was a horse trainer and had been training horses for all of her life. And she had come to essentially the same realization: this is coercive. And so she went on a walkabout, essentially, and discovered a very different way to interact with horses. And you could call it a metaphysical or an empathic way of dealing with horses. And so through that, I started finding my way back to my own life and my own existence through quiet, contemplative times with horses. And through that process, I also started studying real estate and really starting to understand it. And so I went back into it, and I went back into it through guides and mentors, and started investing in commercial multifamily rather than single family. And a lot of reasons for that. It's just less risk. It's involved with teams that are experienced, and it has resilience through recessionary periods, and so on and so forth. So that's how I got to where I am, from the academia world, which I'm still in, and into the financial world where I'm at.
Awesome. Okay. So that's a lot of life history that goes into the work that you do with people. So when you have people come to you for the first time, right? What are the things that are usually most in their way? What are the things that are the biggest challenges for them?
When people initially come to me, all they want to do is talk about their money. And I want to talk about what's going on in their life because that's the stumbling blocks is what's really going on with them in their development. And when I find that out and when I work with them through that, then we're going to find a way for them to develop wealth that supports their deepest passions. And I want them to be involved and engaged in what means something to them. Because wealth is never going to bring happiness. You don't need happiness to find fulfillment. Wealth can only bring us opportunities to enhance the most valuable, important things in our life. And so I want people engaged in what is important with them. And so some examples. Patrick was in the insurance field. He had a really traumatic childhood, but he had pulled himself together and he put together an insurance company and had done very well throughout his life. And he had come to a point in place where he was ready to retire and he sold his business. And so he had a lot of capital. And he went to financial advisors like most people do. And so he had all of his assets in stocks and bonds. And in this time of uncertainty, he knew that wasn't protecting and preserving his wealth. And so that's how he ended up coming to me. So we started out by talking about what was meaningful to him. And what is meaningful to him is being able to help teams to come together as teammates to not only perfect their athletic abilities, but to love the process of developing their athletic abilities. And in doing that, to come together as an extremely supportive and loving team. And he's a very loving man. He has a real gift for doing that. And so, in finding that out, it was easy to talk with him and to help him to realize that there are other avenues, that there's no such thing as a risk-free investment out there. It does not exist. But there are avenues and ways that are better than other ways. And certainly investing in private placements is much better from most perspectives than leaving all of your money in stocks and bonds.
So
And
I'm
so
going to ask you to define that term for the people who may not know what private placements means.
private placements are alternative investments outside of the stock and bond market, which are public markets. And private placements are not what you're going to find in the public market. And a private placement can be a real estate opportunity. It can be a multifamily complex. It could be a self-storage building. It could be an office building. It could be some of the assets we invest in are ATM machines. It could be a private company, and we also are involved in the purchase of thriving companies like Patrick's company that the owners are retiring and they're selling off those businesses, but they're profitable businesses. So we invest in all of those. Why do they call them private placements? One is they're not in the public marketplace, and the fact that they're not in the public marketplace makes it very difficult to find those and to know whether or not they're actually valid and good investment streams. But why should people do that? Tiger 21 is an organization, it's a support network essentially for ultra high net worth individuals. And they share where their investors, where their members are investing. They share it collectively. They do not share any, it's all autonomous and nobody is sharing their private information. But they collect all that information and they put out a publication each and every year. And the ultra wealthy are putting about 65% of their assets into private placements and only about 16, 17, 18% at most in the public markets. So why don't more people do that? There's something like in the United States, there's something like 43 million accredited investors. Accredited investors have assets of $1 million. And out of those 43 million, only about 5% of those individuals are investing in private placements. There's a lot of barriers to that. When we just mentioned one, it's private. So you have to know where to go to find those. And then the second thing is, like you just mentioned, many of your in your audience don't even know what a private placement is. So there's the educational process as well. So understanding what they are, and then once you understand what they are, the really big barrier is actually finding them. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. One of the things that I really try to do when we talk about money on this show is make sure that people are educated about the market, because you can't navigate what you don't understand. And so it's super important to make sure that a lot of people have issues around money where they get like stuck, they get
Mhm.
overwhelmed. A jargon term gets thrown around and they're just like, no, no.
Yeah.
So I try to make everything clear so that it makes
Mhm.
the overwhelm factor lower. You guys may not even know this. I don't think I've ever mentioned this, but if I did, it was a very long time ago. But I used to be a national trainer in the real estate industry, and I was a real estate agent in both commercial and residential and investment properties. And so I am highly knowledgeable around the investment world in real estate. And I was aware of the real estate side of things. And so where do you end up finding these private
The private
opportunities?
deals.
Yeah.
I spent the last 5 years developing an extensive network, and I have about 550 vetted operators in my network that we partner with. And yeah, it's taken 5 years to develop that. It's not easy to find them. There are platforms out there. They're the fund programs where they have a huge fund and you can invest in the fund, and then these funds take your funds and they do the investing in various different operations out there.
The ones where you invest in art and the ones where you invest in like a real estate investment trust and things like that. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that's an easy step into that. And actually, some of those are on the public market as well. But you don't have any say in where these fund managers are putting that money. You just put your money in the fund and they take that and say, we'll invest it for you. That's not the way, that we operate. We have an extensive network of operators, and we bring to our members these individual opportunities. And so each and every opportunity is presented separately and apart from that, and our members decide on each and every property whether they want to invest in those properties. And like what we had talked about, that educational process, that's part of the educational process is how do you know this is a good investment? You have to understand the underwriting process. You have to really understand that you had talked about how knowledgeable you are in real estate. That came from many years of working in that field. And the acquisition process is complicated. And once you have identified a property, that's just the beginning of that. Then you have to go through the contract stage, you have to go through negotiations. Once you get through all of that, then you have to go through a deep dive in terms of due diligence. And that is, one individual says, you don't just walk the property, you have to crawl the property. You have to know not what's on the surface, but what's underneath the floor, what's behind those walls, what is underneath those shingles on the rooftop. That's a deep dive, and you have to do that in
Yeah.
order to reduce your risks. And once you've done all that, then there's the underwriting process, which is the numbers, do the numbers work? And that's an extensive process. And then you don't even have the property yet. So once you go through all of that and you acquire the property, then you have to put your management teams in place. And that's both the teams that are managing the overall asset and the teams that are managing the properties. You then have to be sure that your property management teams have your maintenance teams in place. And and so it's an extensive process. Part of the educational process that we take them through is understanding what all is involved in that and knowing whether or not the operators you're going to are actually going through those processes,
Yeah.
because you can't
So,
really invest with confidence until you know those things.
yeah, I want to bring this back to what we had said we were going to talk about at the beginning, which is the mindset and the purpose, focus, and things like that. When these private placements are obviously higher stress investments, I would say, for people who are inclined towards that. And so, how do you help people manage the stress around those? Because I can, having sold real estate for years for people's homes and then done work with investors, investors have a different angle on their investment stuff. Having worked with a lot of first time investors, the emotional factor isn't as high when you're working with an investor than it is as it is when it's a personal home. They get personally invested in that. But I do still see, at least in beginning investors, getting a little more emotionally involved than they should be. The stress levels get very high, especially if they're trying to do a fix and flip for the first time and they're in over their heads in that way. They don't have somebody to support them and that sort of thing. The stress levels can get really high as you're going through,
Mhm.
especially if a flip is taking longer than anticipated and your holding costs are building and your
Mhm.
profit is shrinking and all of that stuff because of delays by the city or construction or whatever. So, are you involved in helping people manage the stress factor there? Or is that something that they tend to do on their own?
Yeah, and when we were talking about Patrick, we went through these processes, and when I was laying out all of these things that they have to know and understand, from acquisition through underwriting to management, that is what the sponsors do. And just be clear, in the private placements that we're offering, there are two very important players in this. One are the sponsors, or the active players in this, and then the side that we are actually dealing with are the equity partners, the limited partners, the ones who bring capital to the deal so that the sponsors can have all of those headaches and stresses and worries. Nonetheless, when you've never been in this before, you are concerned about all of those things, and you should definitely be concerned about all of those things. And initially, it can really seem overwhelming. And Patrick knew that there was opportunity in private placement. So I didn't have to convince him of that, but I did have to support him through the first investments. And that's the really stressful. The first one is the most stressful. But then once that is done and all the paperwork is done and the money is transferred, and the distributions start coming in, those stress levels begin to drop and drop and drop. And
What investment did you put Patrick into? It sounded like I'm like, I wouldn't even know what to do with somebody who wanted to build sports team morale. I'm like, what investment is that? Where would you find that?
it was understanding that what Patrick wanted and needed was to ensure that his capital that he had put together over his lifetime was not going to be wiped out by a recession or a depression. He needed to know that he was putting his money in a place that was essentially recession resistant and had some ability for inflation protection.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't so much the investment that was directly aligned with his passion, but what it allowed was, once he was invested in a stable investment that was yielding distributions on a very regular basis, his mind was freed up to focus upon that passion of
Ah,
working with teams and building teams.
so the investment didn't address it. It just freed him up to do that. And this
Exactly.
is the
Yeah.
thing, right? Money isn't going to give you happiness, but it can buy you freedom, right? And freedom
Absolutely.
can bring you happiness if you invest your freedom in the way that brings you joy, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And this is one of those things that I think in the spiritual world, we don't talk about money enough. I think it's one of those things that's this dirty little secret that nobody wants to admit they want, right?
Hmm.
It's because the spiritual world says, oh, you shouldn't want money. It's hello, we have to live too. And I want money in the hands of the spiritual people of the world because money is power in this world.
Hmm.
And I want the spiritual, moral, loving, kind people of the world to have the power. Yeah, we're talking about something a little off the wall today, guys, but it's super important for you guys to realize that you can't let your money get too bound up, right? Money can't
Hmm.
be bound up. It needs to move, it needs to flow, it needs to circulate. And when you leave it sitting in a bank account or you have it locked in a CD, which is like one of the worst investments, oh my God, is you're literally locking your money up and
Hmm.
it is not circulating. And when your money's not circulating, when it's not working for you, then you are literally losing money because inflation
Hmm.
will take it or you don't have you lose the
Hmm.
opportunity cost of having done something with it. Opportunity cost, let me define that term. So when you choose to do something with a finite resource, either your money or your time or whatever you choose to do with it, there is an opportunity cost to that of what you didn't choose to do with it, right? So if I choose to spend 3 hours working on X, I can't spend those same 3 hours working on Y. That's the Y is the opportunity cost of X, right? So money's the same way. If you leave it sitting in your bank account and you don't invest it, then the opportunity cost is that investment and what that investment would have yielded, right? And obviously, no investment is risk free, but no sitting it in the bank is risk free either. For those of us who lived through the S&L bank, the savings and loan crashes of the
Hmm.
80s, and there have been bank closures like mad recently
Hmm.
as well, and all of the fact that inflation is exceeding the paltry amount of interest that you would get on any bank account. So you're losing to interest or you're losing due to inflation. All of these things are the opportunity cost. And this is why it's important to participate in investing at as early an age as possible because that allows for compounding. But even later in life, take 10% of what you make, no matter how much that is, and put that into some investment, right? Because that's just good choice, right? Learn to live
Absolutely.
on less, right? Learn to live on less because, the no amount of things that you buy to look good to everybody else is going to take care of you when you get older, right? And they're not going to buy you freedom later. So the big car, the expensive car, and the expensive clothes, and all, none of that stuff pays dividends, people. None of it. We want dividends. Yeah. Okay. So Patrick was freed up to do his stuff, to pursue his passion and live his life because now he didn't. See, here's the thing that nobody tells you about having money is that having money comes with responsibility. When you have a chunk of change in your possession, you now have to steward it responsibly because if you don't, you will lose it over time and or all at once if you steward it badly, right? And so that takes time and energy. And that also requires a new level of knowledge. And so for those of you out there thinking I don't have enough money to invest, maybe you don't have the knowledge yet because the universe isn't going to give you the cash until you know what to do with it, right? And so you need to educate yourself, right? All right. Give us some other examples of how you align purpose and investing.
I liked what you said that you want spiritual people to be financially wealthy because spiritual people are going to steward the earth and one another and wealth in the hands of people who don't have that same spiritual bearing are going to do just the opposite of that. And we're seeing a lot of that these days, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So we need spiritual people to be wealthy. So another example is Odera, who's in higher education as I am. She actually works with neurodivergent students and is has been working and is working to develop programs at the university level for neurodivergent students. But her real passion lies in her ministerial work, and she is and has been a pastor for many years. So her passion is in the ministry, and it lights her fire every time she's talking about that. She is just absolutely on fire. And Odero had some real estate experience herself. She had some short term rentals and other single family home rentals. And so she was a bit more familiar with alternative investing. She had a lot of equity setting in these properties and didn't really have an avenue for further developing that. She's a busy woman and she didn't want to expand that her individual portfolio. So she because her passions are in her ministry. And that's where she wants her time, effort, and energy focused. And so she needed an avenue to develop passive wealth and passive income. And so we helped her to utilize her equity. That equity is going to grow in real estate, but it only grows if that's all it's doing, it grows about 4% per year. That's not even keeping up with inflation these days. So she needed an avenue to access that. She knew how to access the equity, which was through a HELOC, but she didn't know what to do with it, what she had accessed that. So we gave
So
her
I'm going
some.
to define that. HELOC is home equity line of credit, just so you guys know. Okay, go ahead.
Correct. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we gave her the avenue through various different passive private placements to to put that equity to work. And once again, it just gives her an avenue to utilize the capital she has as a means to grow that capital and to do it while she is involved in her university work and her ministry work.
Okay. So basically, you pulled equity out of the properties and put it into a private placement, and that would give her passive income.
Correct. Uh-huh.
Now, let me ask you, why would somebody need passive income who's still working?
Your salary is not going to make you wealthy.
Sure.
It
Yeah.
just isn't going to. And so you need to find other avenues to develop your wealth. And if you're engaged in the work of your calling, like I was and like Darrow is, then you need a passive way to do that because you were talking about opportunity. And if we're putting our efforts into Y, we're taking something away from that X. And passive investing allows us to put our effort into Y without taking away from that X. Uh,
So I'm going
our
to ask a technical question. So if you're, because I'm looking at this and going, okay, you had two options. You could do a home equity line of credit, which is you're only going to be able to borrow up to 85% of the value of the
Mhm.
property, less whatever mortgage you have on it. So there's
Right,
15% of the equity that you're not accessing, right?
correct.
So the question that I have is why would you not sell those properties and do the private placement and get that extra 15% if it's not keeping up with inflation?
Well, that's certainly an option, but it wasn't the option she wanted.
Okay.
That's it was holding on to the properties. There's a sense of security and having, hands-on real estate. So there's that psychological aspect to it. And the HELOC just gave her another opportunity to do that. And of course, not only is 15% of her equity not accessible to her, of course, she's paying interest on that HELOC,
Right.
which is, of course, essentially reducing the the distributions that she's getting on her private placements. Still, she's coming out ahead on that because the returns on her private placement far exceed her interest payments on her HELOC.
Yeah. Let's say, for instance, so, a HELOC is going to be like 8 to 12% now, something like that. Is that accurate? I don't know. I haven't checked the market in forever, but so that means that you would have to exceed that as a return on the private placement investment. And I could hear you guys out there going, this isn't spiritual, but it is, okay? It is. You Money is a language of its own. We teach you about the spirit of the language of spirit, right? And the language of spirit is very specific. It's in symbology, right? Money
Mhm.
is a freaking symbol. Okay, it does not actually exist. It's zeros and ones in the computer. It is not backed by jack all anymore. It used to be backed by gold and silver, but not anymore. It only has value because we believe it has value. That is a freaking symbol, guys. That
Mhm.
is a spiritual symbol. You need to come into alignment with this spiritual symbol to create wealth in your world, to have more of it in your world, to invoke it as a magical element in your
Mhm.
space. And so you come into alignment with it by understanding it, by being responsible with it, by doing your taxes on a regular basis, by doing all this stuff. You're at this higher level. You've gotten past the base level of stuff where you're like, okay, I will do investments. Okay, I will do this and whatever. And now you're standing in a space, and this is going to be the other thing, guys. I want you to really listen because you are getting a unique insight. If you are in a space where you don't have money and none of your friends have money and you don't know anybody who has money, I want you to listen as Alan explains to you the energetic of a person who has money, right? I'm going to ask him to talk about what's going on for them. How do they feel? What are they concerned about? What's their mindset? Because that's the energy you want to embody as you are manifesting the next layer of your success. Okay. So, Alan, talk to me about if you look at your clientele as a large group and you say, okay, these are the common elements of their personality, of their mindset, of their purpose, of their focus. What is true for your clients so that people can hear this and anchor into it?
One reason that I always start out the consultations with getting a understanding, a deep empathic understanding of what their passions are, is for the very fact that you were talking about that you want spiritual people enriched financially. I do too, and I do not want anyone in my group or my organization who doesn't have a higher purpose. I just don't want to be associated with those kind of people in terms of financial matters. And so the energy that I find from really all of the people, the membership in my organization, is a spirit of passion and a spirit of a desire to make a meaningful impact on this world. And that varies. Like Adara is into the ministry. It's a spiritual journey. Patrick is into athletics and sports. To Patrick, that is a spiritual journey. It's a deeply rooted spiritual experience. And and like with me, my company is Steed Talker. That's horse and talker. That is a very spiritual journey for me. And and much of my wealth goes to creating spaces where people can better understand horses. It's uh, that's what I want wealth for, is to be able to create those spaces where we could come together and not only understand the horse better, but by understanding the horse, we can understand our grounding in Mother Earth and in our spiritual lives. And I see that through all of the people who are part of my group and organization.
So as you're working with your higher level clients here that we were talking about, right? Are they operating out of a fear of loss, or are they operating out of a desire for gain? And with that gain being towards a purpose.
Well, there's certainly a concern for loss. I think it would be dangerous not to have some concern about loss. And without that, I'm not sure you would be taking care of and preserving your wealth. But the but the desire to grow that wealth beyond what they currently have, it's none of them. It's not about money. It's about the what money can do, and you were talking about opportunity. So their desire to grow and develop their wealth isn't about money. It is about feeding that passion and freeing up their time and their energies, freeing up all of their energy spaces. So they don't have to go around being worried about losing money. They know their money is growing and developing. And so that frees up that energy, that energetic space that is taken up by concern and fears, and fills it with hope and desire. And that hope and desire then just feeds into their passions to make that difference.
So I'm feeling into the energetic, and I'm gonna just language it a little differently, because the fear that you have around money when you don't have it is the fear that you're not going to be able to pay your bills, that you're going to lose, that your safety and security are at risk. The fears that you have around money when you have it are not the same level of fears. They're more concerns. It's, I want to make a good decision. I want to be a good steward of this money. I have plans for this money. It's going to work for me. And I want to make sure that I am doing the right things with it. And it's more of a proactive concern and less of a holy crap sort of energy. And when you're doing it, it's very much about making the best use of it. Money becomes a tool that you use to shift yourself to that next level. And this has been a great conversation, Alan. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. Tell everybody where they can find you.
We offer a free consultation, and like I said, that's going to start with looking at your highest values in your vision, and they can find that at my website. And we've been talking about Steed, and that's my website is steedtalker.com. So Steed like the horse and talking like I'm doing at the moment.com, steedtalker.com.
Perfect. And that's what we have for you guys this week. Thanks again to Alan. And thank you guys if you've gotten this far and listening. I really appreciate you sticking with us. And go you for investing in your own knowledge about money and energetics. And I will talk to you guys next week. And in the meantime, remember that what you focus on expands, what you intend is what you create. So choose wisely.